In this video, we're going to look at outputs, panning, and effects. The 8 channels of the S2400 are connected to a stereo bus labelled Mix Out, and so if you connect up stereo jack cables here, all of your channels will be heard. You can then pan those channels. To do this, press Shift and Pan, and then use the 8 faders to set the panning for the 8 channels. You can also use the encoder or arrow keys to do this as per normal. If only one jack is plugged into either the left or right mix, the opposite channel will be normalized into that jack, creating a mono mixdown, albeit at a slightly lower volume because they are passively mixed. The S2400 also has 8 individual outputs, one for each of the 8 channels. If you connect a cable to one of those channels, that channel's normal connection to the stereo bus is defeated and it will not be heard via the mix out. There are various ways to combine individual channel outputs and the mix out. For example, if your melodic and harmonic samples were on channels 1 to 3 and your bass line was on channel 4, you could connect up those 4 individual channel outputs to record those discretely, and then take all of your drums and percussion from channels 5 to 8 together from the mix out. So in that example, 8 channels would be recorded onto 6 tracks within your DAW. You can also use this technique to connect individual channels to their own effects rather than having them across the stereo output. So it's not an either or, you can mix or match to your requirements. A word about stereo samples. From any track settings menu, you can choose whether a stereo sample is output in stereo or mono. If you select stereo, then the output will be sent to 2 channels. These are paired 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. If you set the channel of a track to either 1 or 2 whilst in stereo, the output will be routed to channels 1 and 2. If you set the channel of a track to either 3 or 4, the output will be routed to channels 3 and 4, etc., etc. Be mindful that you need to pan your channels in order to hear the stereo sound. So if a stereo sample is output to channels 1 and 2, you will need to pan channels 1 and 2 left and right from the pan menu. There are a number of shortcut keys to make panning more convenient, and those are listed in the help menu. For example, I'm going to use F7 to pan this pair. Also, if you've loaded up a mono sample and it's only playing out of one speaker, open up the pan menu to check you haven't left that channel panned to one side, as this is the most likely culprit. Next, let's move over to Effects, which affects the outputs. To access it, press Shift and Effects. At the time of recording, there are analog filters available in the effects settings, but there may be other options in the future. Use Enter or the encoder to unfold the accordion menu, and you'll see that there are 6 output filters available, and you can individually switch them on or off. These work like the classic machines of the 1980s, so they're part of that retro sound we covered in the last video, but let's discuss what they actually do. The first 2 filters, available on channels 1 and 2, are dynamic filters. These are SSI 2144 low-pass filters that are opened with a simple RC resistor capacitor envelope. The resistor value defines the release time and it cannot be altered. When opened, these filters reach 13 kHz, which is the matching Nyquist frequency for material sampled at 26 kHz. So this matches how samplers were in the 1980s due to the limitations of digital audio at the time, and it's included on the S2400 to enable you to capture that sound. However, unlike the 1980s, you can sample at 48 kHz, 16-bit, and have the full frequency range by not using any of the output filters on the S2400, so you have the best of both worlds. Channels 3 to 6 have fixed filters available. As the name suggests, these are low-pass filters with fixed cutoff frequencies that cannot be altered. These filters are op-amp designs rather than the 2144s used for the dynamic filters. The cutoff frequency of each of these filters is different. Channel 3 has the lowest cutoff and channel 6 the highest. Channels 7 and 8 do not have any filters available. In terms of application, the dynamic filters work best for rhythmic material like drums, and in general the filters are really there for material sampled at 26 kHz that's been pitched down using the classic audio engine to give you that old school sound. But there are of course no rules, you can use them as you see fit. In the next video we'll wrap up the back of the unit by looking at MIDI, clock and USB.